serious? Prostitutes, escorts, strippers, other kinds of sex workers? What was your first day on the job like? Stripped briefly to pay for a semester's worth of tuition and books. On my first day, a lady shouted, "Whip out your pecker." And I couldn't help but to laugh from both nerves and the fact she said pecker. After that, the rest seemed pretty easy. I started as a waitress in a strip club. 3 months later I tried dancing. My first time in the VIP, where I had been seeing the workflow for 3 months, so I knew what to say and where to go. But my hands were shaking. The guy even asked me if I was okay. After that first hour it was fine, but my body literally was shaking in the beginning. I didn't feel scared, though. It was a natural reaction. Former male stripper here. It was awesome. It was comedic, sexy, and fun. Just an absolute party. The crowd had a blast. We quintuple lap danced the bachelorettes. It didn't pay much, but I wasn't really in it for the money. I would totally start another show if I can make it happen. I only had 2 brief uncomfortable moments that night. First, an old woman just grabbed my goodies. Second, another old woman shoved $1 so far between my cheeks that I didn't see it until after the show. Escort in a brothel? Honestly, my first day was a mixed bag. The other girl I worked with was hilarious and properly took me under her wing, and fed me a glass of wine before my first jom to settle my nerves. I haven't drank on the job since that day, but that one drink really helped. I got tipped by one client, assaulted by another. When I was assaulted though, the other worker, the receptionist and my boss all had my back and gave him a proper telling off and barred him. This was a one-off, it hasn't happened since. I've never felt safer in any other job, and I have more control. I walked home that day with more money than I'd earn in a week in my last job. I've never looked back. I was a cam girl for a little bit. First time was with my roommate. She had been doing it and I knew she was a cam girl. She was making more in one night than I was from babysitting like 4 times a week. It was really awkward at first, but my roommate was a pro and played into it. First time a lesbian sort of thing. Those tokens were flying in. Despite it being awkward, it was fun and we made a lot. So I started my own account, became a cam girl. Former exotic dancer of 3 years, the first night was intimidating in part because the other dancers are generally hostile toward new girls. That may have just been the case at that club, I'm not sure, but also because the job itself is so heavily stigmatized that you find yourself afraid that somebody you know will see you. That faded after a few weeks though, and it was actually a really fun job. You should always be careful not to fall into the lifestyle though. Keep work and personal lives separate. 6.9k, dare I say, nice. I'm long retired now, but I was 21 at the time and at a loose end, new city and no job, so decided to work at a gentleman's club, as a prostitute. I'd done my research and been in for an interview, so I was feeling confident and relaxed. No one else showed up on time, so I was the only girl there on the day shift and sat chatting to the receptionists. My first client was a really good-looking English/Sri Lankan guy who was really sweet and equally nervous. We both couldn't believe it was the other's first time until we were both fumbling and laughing trying to put a condom on correctly. I can't remember who else I saw that day, but I do remember getting paid more than I had earned in a week working 2 jobs. I ended up working for around 7 years and really enjoyed it. Was a stripper in my late teens. First day I was nervous as fuck. Some drunk dude walks up to the stage waving a $1 bill and said, "Slap your ass, I'll give you $1." Oddly enough, that made me somehow more comfortable with the whole thing. I actually enjoyed it, and wasn't half bad. Made more money, legally, from 17 to 20 than any other job I had until like 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. Did escorting for about a year. First day was relieving. I was terrified at first because I was given the rundown for what redheads to look out for. There were a lot, but I went on. Most of my clients ended up being older men who just wanted a pretty girl to be seen with and to listen to them. My first day felt more like a therapist than an escort. A bit intimidating, but not really much different. If anything, I had a little better of an idea of what I was doing compared to working at Starbucks. Awkward, because I was bad at it. I don't really know if this counts, but I'll share anyway. I am not a sex worker, although I was paid in the, somewhat, recent past to work a glory hole. The glory hole was in the staff bathroom of a club not far from my student accommodation. I was told that certain guests were going to be given the option to use the staff bathroom for the glory hole, but not to expect that many people. I was paid £200 each night and I worked 2 weekends in a row. My first night, and pretty much every night, was very scary. My expectation was that a dick would come through the hole, I blow it until he comes and job done. I didn't accept that I was going to have abuse shouted at me, having people look over and under the cubicle and threatened. Every night I complained to the manager and he promised to do something about it, but nothing ever really changed. Like I said, I only worked 2 weekends because it was really scary. Hope this was somewhat relevant. I knew what it would be like going into it. I'd been working for the agency for a few months as a driver, taking the girls to their appointments, making sure they didn't get robbed or killed. My boss mentioned that he had had some interest from females wanting a male escort. I'd seen Deuce Bigelow. I figured, why the hell not? I was 18, and I cleaned up pretty nice. My first client was a woman in her late 30s. Not a supermodel, but not unattractive at all. She was in town for some auto parts convention and wanted someone to show her around. We wound up sleeping together after. I got my money, and left the next morning. I did that until I moved out of state 3 years later. I'm 21 and was an oil wrestler for a short time just last year, and I was terrified. I had no practice or was shown anything. I made $10 in tips that night, but as it went on for the next 3 weeks, I began making more. The girls were really cliquey and at times total bitches. The men we entertained were disgusting low hygiene cowboys and rude as fuck. Not my scene, but nothing but respect for the women who are able to have fun in that environment. Nerve-wracking. It was professional, but I was 21, it was just me and him, and he had to drive me to another location. But he was super nice and realized real quick I was nervous, so he talked to me the whole way there. He even made jokes while we were switching positions. Fun guy. I would keep going in that line of work, but a friend caught chlamydia, so I was out. Dancer here. I remember being chill and excited about it. This was 20 years ago. The next few times were a little more nerve-wracking, because what does an 18-year-old have to say to middle-aged men, you know? Took me a while to get comfortable. Now I'm a pro and can't wait till the clubs open again. Terrifying. I was 21 years old and had never even stepped foot inside a strip club. I had bought a matching bra and underwear set from Marshall's along with regular heels. Big mistake. I was told to watch the dancer before me on stage, who of course was gorgeous and clearly knew what she was doing. I went up there and immediately busted my ass because of the normal-sized heels. The rest of the time was just spent holding onto the pole for dear life and hoping I wouldn't get fired for being the worst dancer they'd ever witnessed. I wasn't fired and eventually got the hang of everything, but I still cringe at how awful those first initial days were. I was 18 and naive. My first client chose me because I was new, fresh meat. He was a regular at the club. I was terrified but went along with it. He made me call him daddy, and every time he pushed into me I winced from pain. He secretly took the condom off. The manager or girl who gave me an introduction tour never warned me of clients trying to take off condoms. I couldn't tell management about him since he was a regular at the club. They also never told me there was an emergency button to leave the room if I needed to. I only learned 3 years later when a client beat me. That's when I decided it was my last day. First job in the industry was a sexting operator for a dating website. I found out it was a scam. I was basically a bot and never got paid for talking to people. Lol, they owe me at least $120. I hope their site is exposed one day. Edit, first day was weird. I had to cater to a bunch of random guys. There was no training, just thrown into random chats with random guys. I basically made up nonsense to keep the convo going so they could buy more credits to make the website rich while we get nothing. I was basically the person that was like, don't you like talking to me? Why won't you buy more credits then? Edit 2, oh, I also forgot to mention. I remember feeling really weird the first day because as bots we had access to a bunch of random women's nudes. They looked like amateur porn stars or something, but I remember being like, who are these women? It just felt wrong. It was really sad for me. I remember going home and crying for hours. It was traumatizing, mainly because of the client. I was a dancer in my college years. I was so nervous not because of the dancing, but because I was afraid I didn't look as good as the other girls / they wouldn't like me. It turns out they were so sweet and so diverse. One of my co-workers had 5 young kids. One of them was a PhD candidate at one of the local universities. One of them loved to bake in her spare time. Sharing small details like that about our lives made us grow together. Most of the regulars that came in were your average guys, nothing weird or creepy. Eventually, when you got to know them enough, they would talk about things that stressed them out, like their debt or their job or my 13 daughter is smoking. I'd what to do and you'd be more of a listener and advice giver instead of a sexual being. I cam. My first time doing it, something happened and my stream was shown on a lot of different places and I had almost 1,000 people show up. I was terrified going into it, but once the money started to get rolling it felt a lot more natural. It was liberating. I was nervous at first but all smiles afterward. Being a guy, I probably had different experiences. I was awkward looking even through my early 20s. I decided to become a rent boy when I realized there was a certain subsect of older gay gentlemen who appreciated the way I had aged and carried myself. I did it for about a year or so until I met my husband. All in all, I made some money and walked away feeling better about myself. Well, I'd like to start by saying, I used to be a male escort at age 15. I looked way older than I was. My first day was a little awkward, but that's because at the time, I was mute. I put up a flyer on Craigslist saying I was a young male mute escort and that I'd message my rates. At first, I was scared, but not because it was my first time. I'm just a very shy introvert. When I got my first message, it was from a much older woman. She looked to be around 50. I told her my rates and we talked about what was going to happen. She was sweet and caring, but she was one of those people you could just tell was lonely. Later that night, I got dressed, we met up at a hotel she had paid for, and we had sex. After that though, for the rest of the time, we just cuddled and she talked to me about her day, what's going on in her life, etc., and I just listened. So all in all, my first day wasn't really bad. I just ended up being more shy than I had wanted to be. Not the same, but I met someone on a sugar daddy site. Since I was looking to be with someone who was in more finances than I ended up a survivor of repeated sexual assault. So, not great. My first porn shoot was fine. I went in, I'd paid a makeup artist so I got that done first. I shot 2 solo scenes, got my money and went home. Then I ate fried chicken because I'd been fasting. It was amazing. In my early 20s I did some escorting, gigolo work. I was afraid at what type of women would be willing to pay for sex, and my first client was exactly what I expected. Luckily, she didn't want me to do anything to her and just wanted to give me a blowjob while I fingered her asshole. She was amazing at it, BTW. My second client that day, however, wow, she was a legit 8 out of 10. She was a taller, 20-pound heavier version of Maria Menounos. You name it, she wanted to do it. She actually ended up being a repeat customer. Numerous times we would get together, and when all was said and done was my best and most frequent client. She was extremely wealthy and just loved the idea of paying a man, other than her husband, to do the things we were doing. The first time ever escorting was not like I planned on I'm gonna do this. I was propositioned at a club, where I was dancing. I couldn't make it in a strip club, was not making more than $100 to $300 a shift, and every girl would brag about making $1-2K. I'm like, WTF is wrong, W me, but I needed the deposit for my house and took him up on it. I look back and think, wow, I can't believe he even paid me that much, cause I was definitely grossed out and unenthusiastic. Stripper here. I had too much fun, felt comfortable on stage and doing lap dances, made $500 and was hooked forever. I did phone sex for a bit and the first day was awkward. I felt like I was in a corny porno from the 80s. There were also a surprisingly high number of men that asked which area I lived in and were weirdly insisting on knowing. I'm guessing BC it was over the phone, it felt more real to them. After a couple of hours I got into my role and moaning like a bad actress became easier and funnier, but the first hours definitely felt awkward. Late to the party. I've dabbled in real life sex work in the past. My first time was really scary for me, but the client was very kind and considerate and the experience ended up being really easy. I left the session feeling like I'd been lied to by society all this time. I didn't feel traumatized or dirty or bad. I'd had a good time and made a lot of money. I remember feeling like an idiot for not having started escorting when I was 18. Male porn talent here. First day filming a scene was scary for me. This was back in 2007 BTW. I was nervous, shaking, just having stage fright, I guess you could call it. Sex is one thing, but videotaped with a crew and following a loose script, it added up to the point that I was honestly almost considering bailing out. My female counterpart in the scene was very nice and helped me get over it. I still chat with her today as friends. She's not in the industry anymore. A bit late to this, but my mother and I lived / kind of ran a trap house and we always had men stopping by and looking. One day my mother told me that she had a friend that had some great weed and I should meet him. I was 20. We walked over to the friend's house and she led me to the back of the house and introduced us and promptly left. It wasn't until we were smoking and he informed me that he added a bit of crack and I was too nervous to say no. My first client was an 87-year-old who then threw $100 at me that my mother then demanded that I give her $70 for introducing us. Shit definitely could have gone much worse, but it was just a job to me, and I ended up making decent money.